From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to on behalf of the John Kluge Center here at the Library of Congress, to a lecture by Evgeny Pivovarov from St. Petersburg, Russia, on the Russian and Slavic collections of the Library of Congress, and particularly on the Russian emigres who have been employed here at the library over the past century plus. It's a great pleasure to introduce Evgeny, and I'll be very brief. For somebody so young, he has a very impressive resume, lots of publications. He has his education. He has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from institutions in Bryansk, Russia. He has a degree candidate of historical sciences from St. Petersburg University, and this is a degree roughly between an American master's and an American doctorate. And then finally, in 2008, he was awarded the degree of Doctor of Historical Sciences by St. Petersburg State University. And he has worked at St. Petersburg University as a senior teacher, and he's worked at the Academic University of the St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences most recently. He has published 3 books. 2 of them are on the Russian Slavic collections of the Library of Congress, and we have them in our collections if you'd like to look at them. The 3rd is a textbook on English for historians in Russian. And he has many articles, and I won't even begin to read those. So without further ado, let me introduce Evgeny Pivovarov. Please.
Good day. Thank you for coming, and thank Mr. Like for introducing me. I'm really grateful for those who gave me the Fulbright grant, which allowed me to accomplish my research, and for Kluge Center staff, who were very friendly and helped me not only during the research, but when I had an accident during the stay in America, and helped me to accomplish my research in time which I wanted. I would like to talk on the Slavic collections development in the Library of Congress, but I'll mention several positions about the development of Slavic collections in other American universities and scientific centers, because it was the process which lasted for 2 centuries and which was begun in the second half of the 18th century and still is not finished, I hope. But the problem is now the American society is experiencing some kind of shift. When during the escalation of confrontation between the USSR and the United States, Russian materials and Slavic materials were extremely important to the country, and the Soviet studies were promoted. Now it's the time when Russia and former Soviet Union states are not so important to America because they lost. And now Arabic world and the Middle East are more important. So it's the high time to speak about the historical perspective of the collections development. It's generally accepted that from the 1950s, the Library of Congress Slavic collections and the Slavic Library in Prague have been the biggest outside the USSR. Programs and projects undertaken by employees of numerous Library of Congress special departments and divisions became from this time international, united scientific centers in different countries. Slavic materials are stored in all Library of Congress divisions. The Russian collection consists of about 700,000 volumes. The Czech Republic and Slovakia, 115,000. Serbia, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Montenegro, 130,000. Poland, 150,000. Other former USSR republics and Western publications devoted to Russia are represented by an approximately similar number of titles. But these figures are very approximate and they are nearly amounts. Generally accepted that the Yudin Collection acquisition in 1906 was the main factor which caused Library of Congress domination in this field. The scale of this endeavor, however, should not overshadow the fact that Slavic books were on Library of Congress shelves before 1906, and the decision to purchase a Yudin collection was not spontaneous, but followed after a long period of negotiations. Even the first destroyed by British troop little reference Library of Congress contained books about Russia and the Slavic countries, and we may see them in the Jefferson, as well as in Jefferson collections. The first, still very small collections of materials devoted to Slavic world appeared on the Library of Congress shelves at the end of the 18th century, when the dialogue between scientists from the Academy of Sciences, Russian Academy of Sciences, and their American colleagues from American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in Boston was initiated. Another important source of information about the distant regions were books collections owned by recent immigrants from Poland. Tadeusz Kostyuchka, Julian Nimtskevich, and Kazimir Pulaski, through their personal acquaintance with the United States elite, were able to draw public attention to the problems of the country. It is symptomatic that among the first books on the Library of Congress shelves at the time of its foundation, as well as Thomas Jefferson Library, approximately the same number of volumes were devoted to Russian Empire, which at that time actively influenced European and world politics, and Poland, which was going through decline, disintegration, and final loss of political independence. In contrast to the book collections of the American Philosophical Society and American Academy of Arts and Sciences, focused on obtaining academic publications and organization of regular exchange projects, the ideological content was very important for the Library of Congress creators and its first users. Although at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th centuries, the leaders of New Republic were trying to secure powerful overseas empire support, their sympathies were on the side of both politically, economically weak Polish government, which was closer, easier to understand, and most importantly, more democratic than its neighbors, which it was absorbed by. Increased attention directly to Russia was a result of diplomatic relations evolution at the end of the first decade of the 19th century. Despite the fact that for a vast majority of Americans, the Slavic world was a distant and little-known region, some Americans started showing interest in Cyrillic publication and included them in their collections. We should not forget that John Quincy Adams was the ambassador to Russia, and and John Schuyler was an ambassador to Russia, and their collections came, one to the Library of Congress, another to Cornell University. So Russian materials were at the collections of the first presidents. It was famous about the correspondence between Thomas Jefferson and, for example, Alexander I, the Russian Tsar, and the Library of Congress contains these letters. It is known about the correspondence between Russian famous scientist Lomonosov and Benjamin Franklin, and these letters are kept also in Benjamin Franklin's letters. So the Founding Fathers had strict and constant contacts and links to the Eastern European publications. But probably they were, first of all, in French. At this stage of Russian-American relations, a diplomatic mission staff played an important role in the development of cultural relations. I've mentioned Adams, I've mentioned Schuyler, but Russian ambassadors and people from the embassies, Wallenstein, Svinin, Politica, published a lot of books about America, published in Russia books about, published in America books about Russia, and had collections. They were not only engaged in the research and publishing activities, but also contributed to the development of Russian and English book collections in the United States and Russian Empire. Although until the last quarter of the 19th century, books exchange between two countries was often carried out through the official channels, it remained a process not officially regulated. For example, the Smithsonian Institution employees were able to, using diplomatic channels, considerably increase its books collections with the Russian publications. The Smithsonian deposit became the part of the Library of Congress general collection in the end of the 19th century. So these books are on the Library of Congress shelves as well. But all attempts to purchase the whole well-developed library owned by Russian citizens were not supported. For example, the Library of Congress, along with other scientific centers, was trying to buy Dmitry Buturlin's collection of rare books. It was very important and very big, but the purchase wasn't approved by the Senate. 3 decades later, United States administration was absolutely not interested in Russian materials left after Alaska accession. Extensive libraries, including thousands of volumes, were not demanded. Only in the middle of 1920s, the staff member of the Library of Congress, Michael Vinokouroff, came to Alaska and came to New York and purchased these materials for the Library of Congress. Now it's the largest collection of Russian archival materials in the manuscript division, the archives of Russian Orthodox Church in Alaska. Thousands of documents about the exploration, Christianization, about the life of Russian Americans, up to the 1867. Russian-American diplomatic rapprochement in the 1960s, 1970s, caused by many common foreign policy challenges, forced to revise attitudes towards Eastern European publications. By the beginning of 1880s, it had become possible to sign an agreement about official publications exchange by which books from Russian Empire arrived to American libraries until 1917. Government and Congress support expressed in the increase of library space, funding giving the library several nationwide functions, including the right to receive mandatory copies, allow the Library of Congress to overcome the lag in the Slavic collections development, typical for the second half of the 19th century. One other United States scientific center, Yale, Harvard, Cornell universities, New York Public Library regularly acquired Russian books and received large private libraries collected by Americans interested in the Russian Empire as a gift. For example, the person who created the Russian collection of Yudin Collection here, Babine, worked with Eugene Schuyler Collection and White Collection, who were the ambassadors to Russia at Cornell University at the end of the 19th century. In 1901, there were only 569 volumes on the shelves of the library which were characterized as Russian. By 1917, their number reached approximately 100,000 items. Along with collection expansion through the book exchange, the Library of Congress simultaneously had an opportunity to purchase already existing book collections. In just 2 years, its collection of Slavica became the largest in the country, bigger in size and thematic variety than previously existing ones, which, however, did not make a revolutionizing effect on the development of Slavic studies. The Yudin Collection, a private library of the Siberian merchant, was bought in 1906 and came here in 1907. It contained about 80,000 volumes. But unfortunately, the country did not have enough qualified specialists capable to fulfill even partial processing of the materials having been received. Cataloging lasted for decades. The quiet publication classification necessity didn't allow performing large-scale projects updating the collection. Slowly, Yudin Collection value as a source of relevant information decreased. The important role that the Russian Empire and other Slavic countries began to play from outbreak of the First World War changed the collection status. The Library of Congress, no special units, the Slavic section was established. I'll mention only some of those who participated in the section or division, Slavic section on division activities, but there were, now I understand, hundreds of them from 1920s to 1980s. hundreds of people who came from Eastern European countries, not purely from Russia, but from Latvia, Estonia, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, and other countries. And they came to the United States and naturalized as American citizens and play important role not only in the creation of the Library of Congress collection of Slavic materials, but in the development of Slavic collection in the United States as a whole. The most important, Alexis Babine, who bought the Yudin Library and who was the head of the library of the Slavic division. Michael Vinokouroff, who bought the Slavic collection archives, Russian Orthodox Church archives. Henrietta Derman, who headed the Russian, who came back to Russia and headed the Russian libraries at all. George Novosiltsev, who created the first books about indexes of Russian books here. Nicholas Rodionov, who was the head for 2 decades, the head of the Slavic division. Sergei Yakobson and others. The efforts to process the original Yudin collection made it accessible to students studying Slavic countries, American researchers, and Russian immigrants. Unfortunately, it was accomplished by the destruction of book acquisition traditional channels. Characteristic pre-war forms of international cooperation organized during the time of political and economic instability in most European countries, unable to provide significant resources for projects not directly related to national security. Most of Russian institutions and companies having participated in the research programs were liquidated, reorganized, or nationalized. All attempts to re-establish the Library of Congress context with former partners failed. One of the key factors that had a negative impact on the development of collections in this period was the Library of Congress official status. Unlike American universities and public libraries in large cities, primarily Stanford University and New York Public Library, which had considerable independence to enrich their collections with newest publications, the archives of the activities of Library of Congress in this field were subjected to strict ideological control. Purchasing books published in Russia after 1917, the Library of Congress was forced to use services of different mediators. First of all, the organizations in the countries that surrounded the Soviet Union. Secondly, the immigrants, publishing houses, and book-selling companies, most of which had constant relations to Soviet organizations selling antiquariate books or rare books, which were stolen from the Russian palaces and the Russian libraries and were sold in one of the books, recent books, were called the treasures for tractors. They were sold for the industrial goods to develop the Russian, not industry, but the Soviet military production. So a Library of Congress has thousands of books in the rare division, which can be characterized as Russian treasures. And one of the rarest books that can be found elsewhere than here. So the Russian researchers have to come to research the Windsor Palace collections, for example, which belong to the Russian royal family. They came to research here. And in Russian unfortunately, in the Hermitage and Russian palaces, they can't do that. Besides, there are a lot of books which are extremely rare and can't be found in Russia because they belong to the churches and belong to the synagogues. And I found a huge flow of books from which were stolen and taken from synagogues, which came to Israel, to Palestine, and to the United States, and were sold here. And they came, for example, to this special section here, and they are extremely very rare as the heritage of this branch of the Jewish ancestry. Purchasing books, besides, I've told that the Slavic division and the Slavic section was staffed by the people who came from Russia. Their negative attitude towards Bolshevism prevented them from buying books from Russia. They suggested the Yudin Collection as unique and very strict mediator between the pre-revolutionary culture and the culture of Russian immigration. Besides, the American government itself saw it as the manifestation of its Soviet non-recognition. So the library was kept, unlike all other materials in the Library of Congress, not in general collection, but separately, up to the beginning of 1940s. So we may understand that by the 1941, the collection of Slavic materials in the United States and in the Library of Congress was rather a manifestation of the product of the United States foreign policy evolution from the most part of the 19th century isolationism to expansionism, being rather a symbol of the counter-imperialist claims than a system emerged as a result of any objective requirements for a significant number of Cyrillic books having a strictly practical reference purpose. In an often quoted Roosevelt's letter to the librarian about the Yudin Collection, he noted total development of Slavic studies in the United States, thus confirming the lack of any objective reason for such a large-scale transaction. We should not forget that Babine brought the library during the Russian Revolution and brought it from the region which was the fighting region, and he took the library immediately after the nearest villages were totally burned. So, purchase of the largest private collection became a statement about the new challenges the state was facing. Such a massive spending of federal funds for the library, consisting mostly of Russian books, was unclear to ordinary Americans. Therefore, it was frequently mentioned that the library was bought not from a noble man, but from a person who, through good fortune and persistence, became wealthy, but spent money for books. The deal was interpreted as the owner's gift, which undoubtedly promoted favorable public opinion. So I've told that during the confrontation, it was the statement about American non-recognition, the new Soviet literature. So the new Soviet literature was rarely bought, and usually they were bought, some publications devoted to Russian culture, Russian theater, Russian fine arts. For example, the books about the Pushkin anniversary, jubilee, about the Russian collections, and so on. So the two activities brought most public attention: the transfer of Russian Orthodox Church archives to the library, and the purchase of several purchases, actually a serial of gifts of purchases of Russian Winter Palace collections. But really, it's not the good name for these collections because they were brought from many collections which did not belong to the royal family itself, and the royal family itself was too large to be a small group. Besides, those who participated in the development of the collection and the development of Slavic studies in America were immigrants. The most famous of them were Vernadsky, Karpovich, Florinsky. They worked for several times at the Library of Congress. They advised the librarians and the special staff heads. But they were the immigrants, and they did not like the regime at all. They just fled out of there, and they could not advise to purchase Soviet books. Even in the 1930s, when the official contacts became the reality, these they did not really purchase Slavic books, and constant exchange programs were not organized. Besides, we should not forget about the economical crisis, which prevented from extending the collection and founding the new collections methodology. Even in 1950s, when Sergei Yakobson and his colleagues' efforts allowed the Library of Congress to get the newest Russian publications, the growing amounts of them, the Russian immigrants wrote letters to the administration and they accused the head of the new division, the Slavic division, that he's promoting the communist ideology. And you know what it may cause during the time of the Cold War and during the 50s. And so we just may say that new generation of the Library of Congress specialists should have been credited for maintaining the balance in the Slavic collections development having been achieved in the 1940s, during 1950s and 1960s. The problem was that the head of the library was the brother of Roman Yakobson, who made during this time several voyages to the Soviet Union. And so they had to break their, they didn't respond since the 1960s at all, two brothers. The Second World War marked the beginning of the new period in the collection history. Necessity to improve, first of all, reference services forced to reform the division. During the short period of the collection was processed, at the same time, it was attempted to overcome disproportion in the collection development, having existed since the beginning of the 20th century. Sergei Yakobson and his colleagues established permanent book exchanges between the Library of Congress and Eastern European scientific centers, publishing houses, and publishing organizations. He made several business trips, dozens of business trips to Europe, and he observed the European Slavic collections himself. For the first time, over the Library of Congress division, engaged in working with Cyrillic materials, had an opportunity to increase collections with all variety of publications published in the Slavic languages. Bulgaria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and other states that had become socialist brought increasing attention of American scholars. Sovietology, becoming one of the prestigious fields of study, received priority financing from both state agencies and non-governmental organizations supporting academic studies in the United States. And here we should mention the Fulbright, who began giving money to Sovietology, the Rockefeller Foundation, who sponsored, and Ford Foundation. In the 1950s, the Library of Congress had the status of the research center developing nationwide standard in Slavic publications processing and storage, contributed to the unique archival and book collection system creation, which included professional associations, universities and government agencies, united by common mythology and involved in collaborative books exchanges. So the net was created, which has been existing till nowadays. Political and economic changes in Central and Eastern Europe at the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st centuries, new technologies development has become the factors that caused further evolution of Slavic and Russian studies in the United States. So we may suggest that the new projects which have been proposed by the European division and the librarian since the 1980s created the new channels of cultural exchange between two countries. And you know that the European division has a vast majority of activities of promoting Slavic and Russian culture in particular, and working with Russian books and make them accessible not only in the library itself, but through internet and through a vast net of presentations, among them the most famous and about the Prokudin-Gorsky photographic collection, the unique collection which is not available in Russia. And we should not forget the librarians' books about Russia, numerous librarians' books, and his membership at the library at the Russian Academy of Sciences. So, thank you very much for listening to me.
I think we have time for questions. Angela?
You mentioned that the two Yakobson brothers stopped speaking to each other. Explain why. I didn't understand.
Probably it's a long story. Helen Yakobson, who was the professor at George Washington University, and his second wife, Sergei's wife, wrote in her memories that Serge grew in the shadow of his more bright elder brother. So, besides, it's the family reason. It's the family reason, but they had the constant relations throughout all their lives. But Roman went to Russia in 1950s and 1960s for several times, and he had constant relations with not only the academical institutions, but with those who supervised them. You know who supervised them. He wanted himself to be, and he was not the official, the government agency official. He was a professor of Harvard University. He was a private person. And Serge was the official, the head of Slavic division, the division which was on the heart of the attack, because they made the reference services for the government agencies. So that's probably my clue to the whole situation. The fact is, no letters between them from the beginning of 1960s. The last letter was about, and Roman came here several times, no mentions about their personal acquaintance at Cosmic Club or elsewhere, but they attended the same Cosmic Club. So, maybe became elder, the growing in the shadow became more important.
Mark, I have a question. After the downfall of the Soviet Union and the economic turbulence there, what impact did that have on Russian publishing, acquisition, et cetera, here to the library, if anything?
Probably Harold knows more about that, but my vision is the creation of the division, Slavic division and Eastern European division. The main idea was to provide relevant reference information for the government and to give the researchers relevant and newest books. After the downfall of the regime, it was less significant for the American government, and we shouldn't forget that the Library of Congress was created and still is a part of the federal administration. Less important to pay attention to the Eastern world. And the priorities changed to the Arabic countries nowadays after all these terrorist activities. And this field of researches is more sponsored, has more public opinion. And when I came to the division for the first time, it had a huge hall. Do you remember in the beginning of, and now it's some kind of restricted, and it shows some kind of probably from my point of view, shows some kind of, and I saw more researchers working there in the European division that time. Probably it's my idea, not?
I can't remember. Just if I can make a comment, on that, the post-Soviet Russia is the #1 or #2 publisher in the world, kind of up there with Germany, in around 100,000 new titles a year. The entire Soviet Union in its last 10 years published around 70 or 80,000 new titles a year. So you see there's been a big increase, because I'm talking just Russia with 100,000 titles. Now, a lot of those are things that we don't need. They're translations from English on business and computer handbooks and self-development, the kind of thing that you would not have had in the Soviet era. A lot of them are textbooks, children's literature. But in terms of acquisitions, the funds have remained there, and the effort to acquire is there. The big difference is we're getting almost everything now by buying it, not on exchange with Soviet libraries. We're purchasing through a dealer who's based in Minneapolis. Bo?
I haven't.
Влияние спутника.
Oh, yeah. The new division was created, the aeronautics division, which hired for about 30 or 40 people speaking Russian and Eastern European languages, and who worked there, and many of them were the people who were the aircraft engineers or pilots, and participated in the First World War and the Second World War. I can't remember all of the names, but a number of people came to the library itself and made reference services about the Russian airspace program. Yeah. The Library of Congress. Yeah. Yeah. The Library of Congress specialist translated for 3 Russian agricultural missions to the library in the 60s, and they made several presentations at the library and at the federal agencies about that missions. So, and researchers from the USSR came regularly to Slavic division throughout the end of the 1950s and the beginning of the 1960s, and they researched about the agricultural issues there.
Yes, I was thinking how after the French Revolution, the French Republic essentially nationalized, I guess you say, a lot of royal culture and artifacts and all. And the U.S., after the revolution, essentially appropriated, I guess you'd say, buildings and materials that pertain to the British monarchy. So I'm wondering why you chose the word stole. The Bolsheviks stole from the...
Okay, when you come to, for example, the library or to the palace, and you have a keeper, and you have the government. So when you withdraw some materials, you should show for the keeper or to the librarian the order from the government. But if you withdraw the materials without showing any official document, just take it. It's called everywhere, I believe, stealing or muggling. And if those who keep don't know the further fate of these materials, and if they just disappear, and if these materials are sold for penny when it costs hundreds of dollars, I believe it's called the stealing. And I believe that only during the Soviet Union unrecognition, the American government and the American citizens were able to buy these things. But after the recognitions, they did not buy, usually, because it's illegal. And these books and these collections belong not to the Soviet government, but belonged not to the former Russian Empire government, but belong to the royal family It's the difference. Britain was a government, and royal family was a family. And besides the royal family, just imagine, a lot of royal family members and a lot of noblemen lived in America at that time. And they saw their libraries at the booksellers. So I believe it's not very, I can't tell it anyhow else as stealing. It's a criminal case, really criminal case.
Thank you.
But it doesn't change their status now. They are the American property, but the fact that it was sold not properly, but they were bought properly. That's it. Yes?
Barbara?
You mentioned books often that were confiscated from churches and synagogues, and you say that there are some of those here at the Library of Congress.
I'm not able to speak about that even now because I just begin researching this question. But one of the key figures who was the mediator in the purchase of Winter Palace's collection, Israel Perstein, as well as Simeon Bolan, the New York booksellers, were primarily concentrated on the purchasing of the Hebrew manuscripts and Hebrew early published books. And they purchased from the Russian organizations such as Amtorg and Международная книга. They purchased these books confiscated from the synagogues, and they sold them to the New York Public Library, to Stanford, and to the Library of Congress. Some of these books came to Palestine. I've told Harold today about that, and they were sold there, and it was the part of the Russian international Comintern spy net. Probably they will be either at the rare books division, at the manuscript division, or at the Middle Europe. It was the special division, the Hebraic division throughout the 30s, 40s, or Semitic division it was called in the library during several years. I'm not pretty sure about the, I just began researching this. Yes, I'll speak about two different times. Before 1917, it was a free flow of publications, west and east. Because generally, there were some sense and motives in Russian library style that time, but they were not very important. Primarily, it was because of the Tsarist regime attempt to be against the revolutionary activities and so on, so on. So the anarchist literature probably won't come. The socialist literature was restricted, but not really. The researchers could at least come to the United States. After the revolution, you understand that probably all of important materials about the American culture, American political situation, the researches about the statistics, American statistics, were available only to those who had access. And those who had access were probably some kind of agents of the Soviet party members, and usually such books were kept not in the general collections, but in the special isolated collections to which the access was prohibited for the common scholars. So they could not read the books of for example, Theodore Roosevelt's some kind of proclamations, or the documents coming from American political parties, and so on, so on. So, and usually the open was the information about the American communist movement, the African Americans fighting civil rights movement, about the collapse of the American liberal system, about the decline of American civilization, as usual. The Soviet Union, from the 1980s, everything became open. Even the secret archives, and some of them came to the Library of Congress. Some secret archives that are closed to the researchers in Russia are opened here because the American scholars collected the materials during the archive opening in the 1980s. And one of the key figures of Russian historical science in that time, Volkogonov, who wrote about Stalin and who was general and of military general, and he had access to the all secret archives, and his papers are kept at the manuscript division here. So you may come and find information about Soviet secret policy, which is not accessible and you can't publish them in, Russia. So, and you have access to them here. And you have KGB archives here at the Library of Congress, and it was a huge presentation about them, and the secret services archives kept here. So. The archives of former Russian spies here. Vladimirov.
Okay, I think we have time for two more. Hello?
I have a question about books that were acquired by founding fathers of America. You mentioned scientific publications, but you mentioned they were primarily in other languages, in Russian, French. Were there Russian books that were acquired? Were there other maps that were more Russian?
Okay, I can comment on it. Of course, first of all, in Russian, there was no Russian language that time. The books were published either in, for the great majority, either in Latin, if they were scientific from the Library of Congress, or from the Russian Academy of Sciences, which came to, for example, Benjamin Franklin, or in French. It was the language of the Russian elite at that time. Russian books are very few, and Russian nobleman and Russian elite was bilingual. They speak French better than Russian. So the first publications which came to the original reference Library of Congress and then to Thomas Jefferson Library were books, the historical books about the region, about Russia, about Ukraine, about Poland, and among them were the most famous, the first English translation of the Polish Constitution, which belonged to Thomas Jefferson and was presented to him by Kazimierz Pulaski, or Kazimierz Pulaski. The books that were presented him personally by Julian Nemtsevich, who was the secretary of Tadeusz Kościuszka. Kościuszka himself, they were friends. They were friends, and they corresponded directly. In France, he met, for example, the Russian ambassador there, who wrote the history of Poland, and they came to the same families. They met the same people. You should understand that the elite was too small. The educated elite who was interested in different regions was very restricted during the people, and there were few books, and Polish books became they were the same amount of them at the initial libraries, just because they knew the Polish aristocrats themselves, and they understood that Poland is a republic. It has some kind of parliament. They help us to fight against the British troops. And it was not the result of the demand of the any foreign challenges. You know that the first mission of the United States just sat at St. Petersburg and did not correspond to the Catherine II, and they were just isolated. They didn't speak to anyone. And only when Adam's son came to St. Petersburg, and they regarded him as a person who can represent for Russia, who is the person wealthy and noble enough to represent the country to the Russian Empire, they began to have any relations to him. And he was not very popular among the Russian elite, but he collected some kind of letters, his correspondence with Russian officials. Then he overviewed this American policy towards Russia. And the further the American ambassadors and the mission staff came to Russia, the more they knew about the country, about its culture, commercial initiatives of American citizens, and more than they could speak, acquire materials in Russian, and the more they were understanding the culture. And the real rapprochement was during the Civil War in the United States and the Russian slave abolition, because it was the common tasks, the common inner and outer world tasks, which both countries faced, and they tried to share the experience to understand how to reorganize the society on a new grounds, how to make the Russian peasants free, how to give them civil rights, how to make the Afro-Americans free, how to give them civil rights, how to organize the government, how to organize the new ministries, how to deal with outer world, how the foreign policy. So it brought more attention, and the Smithsonian Institution was one of the first place in this field, and he began to acquire hundreds of Russian books since that time. And their secretaries, scientific secretaries, Henry and Bayard, they just came to Russia, and Russian scientists began coming here, as it's happening just now. It's the relation which has lasted for more than 150 years. Yes. I've got two monographs on this in Russian and several articles for about 30, even in American journals, the Eastern European and Slavic resources, in the American Ethnic journal, and I'm trying now to accomplish a new monograph about Russian staff members of the Library of Congress as immigrants in Russian, and probably I'll publish I'm trying, at least a set of articles in American Library and maybe Solanas journal about several. It's probably the lecture is a huge generalization, and it's just to show my point of view on this collection, what I found. But I'm more interested in small activities, not minor but small, which showed the collection itself is a living organism with its own genealogy, you know, and it has some kind of periods which are more significant than the others. So I want to make some notes about several Library of Congress staff members who made a huge impact on the development of diaspora here. For example, Andrew and Tatiana Fisenko. They were the members of the Slavic division, but she wrote poetry, and she was the main editor for the Russian poetry renaissance here in the 60s, which was the basis for the coming of such persons as Brodsky. The second, I would like to show the long-time connections between Brodsky and the Library of Congress. And Maklish and and Winston Hugh Auden links to the Library of Congress and Brodsky, because it was a vast net of influences. I would like to. I wrote a lot about and Harold wrote, and it's a huge material about Yudin Collection, and nobody wants to write any more about it. And it's hundreds of books wrote about, articles written about the Winter Palace collections. And it's probably clear. You may have one point of view, or you may have another point of view, but the points of view are clear. And I'm more interested in those activities which are not very known, but which are key factors for the development of, for example, this Serge Jakobson's initiatives were not very really known. And he is not very well known as a historian, although he had for about 15 books which he wrote for the government, for the senators, and which really influenced the American foreign policy, and which made, which I just checked, which became the basis for the official reports. He was the main Slavic field, he was the main Eastern European reference librarian here, and he contributed a lot to the development of American Slavic studies. He created the program, for example, 500 books for the American libraries. Each American library, public library, had 500 of books about Russia. He created the net of American and European libraries, which developed the new cooperative programs, not even in the procession of the materials. You know, the Cyrillic is very difficult to be processed, and it changed over the history. And they put new standards, which they made the conferences, international conferences in this field. So I would like to write more about such people, like Rodionov, who was the head of the Slavic section for 2 decades, and who wrote a number of bibliographies, which are used, still now used. They haven't lost their reference value at all. It's the part both of the development of Slavic studies in the United States, the history of Russian diaspora in the United States, and the history of just small view to the history of Russian diaspora and the Russian studies in the United States. Because it's a huge field of study, and you should have an angle of view trying to describe it. And it's the best one because it's the collection which has existed for 200 years.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.